All right, EJ, it's one of the best sports weekends of the year. 5 straight days of playoff football. Thursday and Friday, playoff college football. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, we have playoff NFL. Today, we are previewing the entire wildcard round of the NFL playoffs. We have 6 games on the docket. Chargers, Texans, Steelers, Ravens, Broncos, Bills. I'm doing this off the top of my head. Packers, Eagles, Commanders, Buccaneers, Vikings, Rams. Rounds us off on Monday. How about that? Remember the whole slate in order, by the way. I don't really want to waste time because it's going to be a long episode. So I'm just going to jump straight into our first game. Chargers, Texans. This is a battle, kind of a mirror image game, I would say. You got two teams with coaching staffs we really like, quarterbacks we really like, receiving cores that are fairly limited for different reasons. Texans, they just all got hurt. And the Chargers, they're relying on a rookie to be their wide receiver one, who did phenomenal this year. You have great defenses. You have good tackle tandems and suspect at best interior offensive line play. They both would love to run the ball in theory, but have been very inconsistent at doing it this year. Again, very, very, very similar teams going at it. Before I kind of dive into my minutia, how do you see this game?
Well, before we dive into minutia, we should tell everybody we're trying to focus on the one thing, the one area of each game matchup, whether it's coaching, personnel, one side of the ball versus the other, that we really think is going to be key to how the outcome plays out in the end. Texans run defense is what I'm focusing on. I'm really interested in what D'Amico can cook up, even with all the losses on defense, because we know Roman wants to run the ball. He's not just a running offensive coordinator, but he absolutely wants to run the ball. He wants to establish the run that way. We're going to see even more of that in the playoffs for all these teams. It's going to be a theme throughout this episode. What can this team do via the run? So the Texans' run defense is 7th best in the league if you look at it in terms of rush yards per game or rush yards per play. But where it drops off is they are 20th, almost bottom 10 in explosive rushing plays allowed. So they're pretty good overall if you look at the statistics, but this is where, when you dive into the nuance a little bit, when they break big. They give up big chunk run plays. Roman's going to hammer them and look to break bigger runs later in the game. This is not news to anybody that's watched playoff football, pretty much ever. And if they start tearing off some of those runs, D'Amico's going to have to tighten up, and that's going to let Justin Herbert go after that secondary. Again, he doesn't have a ton of targets to do it. He does have an arm to threaten every blade of grass on the field. It's a somewhat depleted secondary. That, again, great corner. You talked about great tackles and poor interior offensive line play. Great corner play right now. The safety is a little banged up. So that's really what I'm interested in seeing is D'Amico, who's a great defensive coach, but he's got sort of limited shots in the gun here in terms of run defense. How can he stack up against a very good run designer and a team that theoretically, especially with Harbaugh at the helm, wants to run you over? Like, just from a personality standpoint, that's what the Chargers want to do, is impose their will physically on you. And D'Amico's going to have to see if he can get his guys to bow up. And if he can't, I think this one probably goes the Chargers' way.
What I love about this Chargers run game, and again, I've watched it very closely all year because I work with the Chargers professionally, and I also happen to be a Texans fan, so this is kind of a rough weekend for me. But what I love about the Chargers run game is how versatile it is. Like, this is the only run game in the NFL that's not top 10 in terms of usage of any particular run concept, and they're also 10 to 15% plus in every single concept, whether it's outside zone, inside zone, man blocking concepts like duo, power, counter. Like, they run everything. And that's kind of also contributed to some of the explosive runs that they've hit this year, which is Greg Roman, who has just become a better, more well-rounded play caller this year. I don't think that's arguable. But what I've really loved about his run game is he kind of pokes and he prods throughout the game, and he just tries different stuff. He's like those raptors testing the fence in Jurassic Park. And then eventually he finds something that works because he just has such a diverse run game. And he's like, okay, hey, we popped a couple 7-yard runs on counter. Let's try it again until we pop an explosive because we think we're going to hit this. And then, of course, you get JK 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. He'll hit a 30-yarder, and all of a sudden game's over, right? So I love how willing he is to just try different stuff throughout the game until he finds something that's hitting, and then he kind of just presses on that wound. It helps to have an offensive line like he has with two outstanding tackles that you can do funky stuff with. Like if you want to pull these guys in space, you can. If you want to kind of wrap them up and around and run counter or power behind them in between the tackles, you could do that. Like we always talk about tackles being important in the pass pro game, which obviously they're great in that. Tackles are also really important in the run game if you have athletic guys that can do that, right? And they do. So it's going to be a big challenge, to your point, for Houston to deal with that and kind of remain sound against that. I want to talk about the other guys, though, on the offensive line for both these teams. Interior, they're not good, EJ. Like, they're not. And both fan bases know it. If you're looking at the first half of the season, and I know this is going to be reopening some old wounds for both these teams. First half of the season, the Chargers' interior guard center guard trio was the second worst in the NFL in terms of pressure given up. Texans were fourth worst. Back half of the season, they both improved. Texans ended up being average from week 10 on. They're 17th. Great. Awesome improvement. Chargers also got better. They're still bottom 10. So for me, even though I like the tackle play for both these teams, the interior play has often been what's held both of them back, especially because neither one of these pass games really relies on quick game at all. The Texans are one of the most, voluminous mid-range. Voluminous, right? Like how do I say this? They throw a shit ton of mid-range passes between 10 and 20 yards. Third most in the NFL. They live in the 5-step drop game. And that has gotten them into trouble because their interior has not been able to hold up. And we've seen that throughout the year repeatedly, like especially in the Jets game, like CJ just getting shelled because they could not protect him on the inside. Same thing with Justin Herbert. They didn't really live in the quick game, which has kind of been my one criticism of Greg Roman is like, hey, if you can't pass pro, at least other than your two tackles, like we should at least try to design some layups here. They didn't really do that. And believe it or not, the Chargers, despite not throwing as much as every other team in the league, still were top 7 in terms of deep shots. So when they were throwing, like they were going down the field. A lot harder to do that when, again, you can't pass protect on the inside. So again, we talk about mirror images for teams. I think this game is going to be decided by which one of these guard center guard trios bows up and plays average football, which I know sounds like a slight, and it is, but they deserve it. Like which one of them can be average enough so that their superhuman quarterback can do their thing and work the ball down the field. I don't really think there's any other way around it. May the best offensive line win.
I'm good with that. I think it's rewarding teams that have built properly. And if it comes down to which team is just tougher, and I don't mean physically tough, because look, if you play in the NFL, you are physically tough. That is, you are over the bar. I mean tougher in terms of mental fortitude. And I'm going to harken back to a team that's not playing this weekend, which is the Detroit Lions. And a thought I had after that game against Minnesota was the Lions are one of the best teams in recent memory, especially in the NFC, at just gutting it out, just holding the line until you make a mistake. It's very Kansas City-like, if I must say, right? They will wait until you make the mistake, and then they will make a solid play, and that's the difference. And it doesn't matter if that's in the second quarter or the third quarter or the fourth quarter, they're going to play it the same way. A lot of that comes from the top down with Dan Campbell. He has preached toughness, both mental and physical, since he got there, and it shows up with that team. They just don't break, don't break, don't break, and then come on out. And of all the games this weekend, the team that's able to do that more is typically the one that comes out, especially in playoff matchups. The hitting goes up, the physicality goes up. Everybody says, oh, this feels like a playoff game. What does that mean? It means the intensity is way up. It means the pressure on every mistake is up. It means the clock just ticks louder. You get down and you're like, man, 5 minutes feels like a really short time because it's only 5 minutes left in our season. And Teams that are prepared, teams that have played close games, teams that are mentally tough, teams that don't hurt themselves with penalties or turnovers, those are the teams that advance in the playoffs. So, we'll see which of these teams can really knuckle down in crunch time, because it feels like it's going to be a fairly close game, and one team's going to have to impose their will. And to do that, they're going to have to do all those little things.
I know we're not going to talk about the Lions much in this show because they're not playing this week because they beat Minnesota. I do want to bring up one thing since we're on the topic of them. And I'm really trying to remember who said it this week, and I loved this point that was made. A couple of years ago, when Dan Campbell was getting a whole bunch of flack for going for it on fourth down over and over and over again in seemingly dumb situations. Like, take the points, Dan. Like, that was the narrative. And he just kept going for it and going for it and going for it. And at the time, what Dan Campbell said, as far as his reasoning for going for it repeatedly, was to build up almost like a callus on his football team for when they get in those situations. Because if you are consistently put in a fourth down, you better get this yard or 2 yards, or we don't get anything out of this drive. If you consistently get put in that stressful situation, you're going to build up a resistance to that stress. Like, it's almost going to feel like old hat at some point of like, oh yeah, it's just another fourth down. Like let's go move these chains, or let's get this touchdown, or whatever. And if you can keep your wits about you in January in a fourth down situation, because you've done it more than anybody else throughout the season, that could be the difference between winning and going home. And so even if Campbell acknowledges that the analytics behind some of those calls wasn't correct, I love that he's emphasizing more the psychology behind it than the math behind it, because football is a very psychological sport. It's a very physical sport. It's a very emotional sport. It's not just spreadsheets. It's not just numbers. And if you can build in your team a resistance to stress, a resistance to pressure by constantly exposing them to it, you're going to end up with, games like we saw this past Sunday night, where Minnesota consistently broke on fourth down and Detroit didn't. So ultimately, when we talk about, talent wins games and culture wins championships, like, that's kind of what we're talking about. To bring it full circle to Chargers and Texans, these two teams repeatedly have put themselves in stressful situations this season. And generally, I would say Chargers more so than Houston, generally they've come out on top in those stressful situations. So whichever one of them gets out of this game, I would be hesitant to say it's a one and done type thing, because both of these teams have the culture that can do damage in January more so than just having the talent.
I would agree, and it'll be interesting to see which one does. I'm with you that the Chargers seem to have done that more than the Texans this year. Texans felt like did it more last year. That was their calling card last year. They were always the ones that were finishing, making the plays when they needed to. Chargers obviously weren't last year. Big change in the offseason for the Chargers that we've talked about multiple times. And this year they are making good on all those situations. And it does set them up very well for not only this postseason, but postseasons in the future as well.
Hi, future Brett here. Totally forgot to record this part while we were doing the actual episode, but I did fill out an underdog entry for this wildcard weekend, and I did it entirely on the Chargers and Texans game. So I probably should put that here because it makes sense. Now, I will say I chose this game on purpose because, if the Chargers do well and the Texans lose, I win money. And if the Chargers don't do well and I lose money, Texans probably won. So either way, I win, ideally, unless the Texans somehow lose and I lose money. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Either way, what we have here, J.K. Dobbins, higher than 60.5 rushing yards for all the reasons EJ talked about. Stone Smart, higher than half a touchdown, because Stone Smart has really come on over the last 6 weeks or so. And I think there's a decent shot that we see him get used in the red zone. Tim Settle, higher than half a sack for all the reasons I talked about with the Chargers' interior offensive line struggles. Justin Herbert, lower than 227.5 passing, and Nico Collins, higher than 84.5 passing. That one actually I don't feel great about, but it's Nico Collins, so I'm willing to take the risk there. Now, if you disagree with this entry, and maybe your one hang-up is on Justin Herbert, you think he's going to do really well, there is a way to match this entire entry, which, by the way, because of all the bonuses, even though it's a $25 entry that I filled out, I don't normally do large dollar entries because that's dumb. I only did it for $25, but because of all the bonuses, if this hits 5 out of 5, I win like over $3,000. But let's say you're really interested in winning $3,000, but you're not super confident in the Justin Herbert number. Well, if you're brand new to doing pick'ems on Underdog Fantasy, Justin Herbert happens to be the new customer pick'em special. So you can swap out Justin Herbert lower than 227.5 passing and replace that with your new customer special, which is Justin Herbert higher than half a yard passing. So if you like everything else on there, you think I'm not super crazy for believing in Stone Smart of all people, and you just want to replace the Justin Herbert number with something that's virtually guaranteed to hit, again, I've seen weirder. We did that George Pickens special last year, which was half a receiving yard, and he got like -2. So again, it's happened, but I believe in Justin Herbert to get at least 1 yard in this game. So that's our entry for the week. Again, you can find that at the link in the description below or at the QR code on the screen. Use promo code BOOTLEG. You get that new customer special. You get up to $1,000 in deposit bonuses. We'll sweat this one out together. Again, either way, I win unless I lose. We'll see. All right, back to the show. All right, next game on the docket, Steelers-Ravens. This doesn't feel like a Steelers-Ravens playoff game that we've come to love over the decades, right? And for a long time, anytime you see these two teams, we're excited about it, right? It's a primetime affair. It's two rough and tumble defenses. Like, they play old school football. It's a division rivalry. There's real hatred. There's real passion. These fan bases don't like each other. Like, normally, I really look forward to Steelers-Ravens, and especially in the playoffs. This year, it kind of just feels like Baltimore's about to old yeller Pittsburgh. Like, they started out 10-3, and then, boy, the last month, it just felt like week after week, it's like, oh, we're still doing this. Like, they're just going to limp into the playoffs and get obliterated again, which has happened several times, over the last decade or so. It just felt like all the air left the balloon, and now Pittsburgh is just marching into the bank for their own execution. I don't know. Am I off base here?
I don't think you're terribly off base. On paper, it's the most lopsided game of the weekend. Ravens are favored by a staggering 9 points, which is a huge margin for playoff football. And you're right, it doesn't have the typical, I'd say, traditional feel of a Ravens-Steelers playoffs game. But this is an AFC North game, and they do get weird for all the reasons you mentioned. They've seen each other a ton. They know how to stop each other's first punch. Whether the Steelers can do that remains to be seen, but it feels like if the Steelers play their very best game, their best outcome is somewhere in the middle to make this game even. Whereas if the Ravens play, I would say even a mediocre game, they're probably still going to outclass the Steelers. There's a chance, because it is playoff football, that doesn't happen. It would be a huge spoiler of a game. Feels like it'll be closer than 9 points because, again, AFC North. But Monken has more ability to create points for the Ravens, I think, than Smith does for the Steelers at this point. I don't think there's any arguing that. And this is why the Ravens brought Derrick Henry to town. Like, this game right here. Not including Week 18, because those games are weird for contenders. He's averaging 6.28 yards a carry, just rolling over the last four full games.
31-year-old man right there, EJ.
In just the 2 games he played versus the Steelers, he averaged 6.8 and 5.0. So Derrick Henry has not lost any fastball. Neither has the Ravens run game under Todd Monken. Pittsburgh's going to be looking for the home run shots. And yes, shots, plural, multiple. If they don't get them again, multiple, plural. They're not going to be close in this one. One's not going to do it for them. It's not going to be enough to close the gap between them and the Ravens offense. I know everyone's looking for the Ravens to fold in the playoffs because that's what they do. Nah, this is different. Monken and Lamar in his second year together, they're a different team. They're averaging 30.5 points per game, third in the league behind only Detroit and Buffalo. This is an offensive powerhouse of a team that is more diverse. You talked about their old offensive coordinator, Greg Roman. The thing we always got on him about when he was in Baltimore wasn't diverse enough. Great run designer, didn't have enough in the passing game. He's changed some of that, as you said, for the Chargers. Monken came in and said, no, we're going to modernize, and they have. They get more guys involved. It is not just Mark Andrews or bust, or even just Zay Flowers or bust. And Lamar is having one of the great seasons by a quarterback ever, statistically and otherwise. MVP is a whole nother debate, but this is not a Ravens team that is just going to fold in the face of any defensive pressure. They are an offensive powerhouse, and they are going to be able to impose their will, largely, again, because they went out and got Derrick Henry, and he is flat out rolling right now.
I don't want to say that Derrick Henry's had one of the greatest running back seasons ever this year, but it's definitely one of the most impressive, right? If you factor in the age and the mileage and everything like that, like this is nothing short of stunning. Actually, it's not stunning because it's Derrick Henry, but it's nothing short of incredible. How about that? Right? To be 30, turning 31 this year, already turned 31 actually, and to be this productive, and for 60% of the season before Saquon like really took off, and Lamar obviously was doing Lamar things, and Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow being Joe Burrow, like Derrick Henry was on the short list for MVP for a good part of this year. And it's not that he fell off. He didn't. It's just everybody else did their thing. But to be a 30-plus-year-old running back on the short list for MVP at all, ever, like at any point in the year, is a pretty remarkable achievement. He's one of the best running backs of all time. He's one of the most freakishly talented players of all time. Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. He just needs a ring. And I think he's got a pretty good shot this year of getting a ring. And the reason for that, and to take it back to my original point, the reason why I think the Steelers are kind of marching into Baltimore for their own execution here is it's not just about Baltimore's offense being really good and Derrick Henry and Lamar and all that. It's about the Ravens' defense having a truly amazing turnaround. Halfway through the year, we did a show about all the weaknesses of the contenders, right? And we highlighted the Ravens defense about how, they were bottom 3 in almost every single statistical category that mattered. And we explicitly said, they're not going to get out of the wild card round or out of the divisional round if their defense isn't at least average. Well, if you're looking at week 10 on, I don't know what Zach Orr did to flip the switch. Well, I kind of know what Zach Orr did. He got rid of Eddie Jackson. he made changes at safety, and Hamilton's safety now, and Ardarius is safety now, and Marlon's full-time slot. Like he definitely changed personnel around, and Wiggins is getting more playing time outside, and Brandon Stevens just stopped sucking. So we know how, but it's not just that Zach Orr made them average. It's that over the course of an entire year, Zach Orr made them from one of the 3 worst defenses to one of the 3 best defenses by the time it actually mattered, which is right now. If this team played defense like this from the start, they probably would have been challenging for the 1 seed. Now, would they have still gotten it over KC? I don't know. It would have required them to actually beat KC, and that's a whole can of worms I'm not even going to get into. But they would have been in the mix for the 1 seed if this defense played like this. And so you have a Steelers offense that is bottom 2 in passing yardage over the last month, bottom 2 in sacks given up over the last month. They're fine at running the ball. They're solid at running the ball, but who cares if you can't throw at all? And they're walking into a defense at home, outdoors, in the cold, in front of their home fans who are very loud and very angry about how the last couple of years have gone. And they are 4th best in yards per carry allowed since week 10. They are 2nd in EPA per play allowed since week 10. They have an absolutely massive, nasty defensive line where the lightest guy is Nnamdi Madubuike at 305. And he's the small one, right? You have, hold on, I'm going to get the exact numbers here. Broderick Washington, 315. Travis Jones, 340. Michael Pierce, at least 355. He's listed at 355. I'm sorry, that's not 355. That's 360 plus. He is a sentient boulder in the middle of the defense. And so you have a massive defensive line that can stop the run virtually all by themselves, keep their linebackers clean. Roquan's flying all over the place. The secondary issues have been fixed ever since they figured out who to play in what spot. They have been really effective at rushing the passer. You can't run the ball on them. They get turnovers. They've only allowed 8 explosives over 20 yards, or at least through the passing game. 8 explosive passes over 20 yards in the last, how many games is that? 9 or 10 games, which is, when we were highlighting a midseason, they couldn't stop giving up explosives. So it's not just about, the Ravens can score on anybody. Now it's the Ravens can stop anybody. And they're on the same team. Like, you have an elite offense and elite defense together. Who's beating that? It ain't Pittsburgh. Like, you could argue Kansas City, you could argue Buffalo. Pittsburgh ain't beating that shit. I'm sorry. Like, they're going to get demolished, in my opinion.
One of the most remarkable turnarounds in the league this year. Zach Orr does deserve all the credit. If you did listen to that mid-season episode, it was correct at the time. But right after that, literally a week or two after that, this defense got its act together under Zach Orr. Ardarius Washington, huge shout out for me. Loved him in college. Has played, he's been a role player with the Ravens. It's not that he hasn't seen the field, but he was not a starter. I think it coincides. It's not because of Ardarius Washington, but shout out to him. Shout out to Zach Orr for reshuffling the deck in a very serious way and almost going worst to first inside of 5 or 6 weeks. Because again, they've been at this for 10 weeks, but the turnaround was almost immediate. It took 2 or 3 weeks from the time we cut that episode to where they were basically top 5 over the last 3 weeks and then top 3 over the last 5 weeks. And it just kept rolling. And now, you've got a very serious defense against one of the league's most potent offenses, the AFC's second most potent offense. That's a great combination, peaking at the right time. Credit to Harbaugh for keeping it together. I'm sure there were some voices on the offensive side. At least I'm pretty sure, no matter how good your culture is, it was like, hey, we're holding up our part and then some. These guys are letting us down in a serious way. Didn't allow those fractures to tear the team apart. Zach Orr got it together, and now they roll into the postseason with, I think, the best looking team, top to bottom, coaching, offense, defense, that they've had in a very long time. This is a very real shot this year for Baltimore, not just this week, but throughout these playoffs to finally go get one.
This time of year, completeness of a team is more important than having an elite unit and on one side and a below average unit on the other. Like, you really do need to be complete, and the Ravens are complete. They just happen to have 2 elite units. One quick note, and then we'll get right back to the show. You guys are very familiar with Manscaped at this point because they've supported us forever. But they did just release a brand new addition to their grooming line that you might be interested in called the Chairman Pro, which is an old school electric foil shaver that can give you a professional shave right at home. You can use either the skin-safe 4-blade foil for a smooth finish, or if you want a stubble look, they have multiple options for the stubble trimmer to give you either a 1 to 2 day look or a 3 to 4 day look, depending on your preference. It's also waterproof, so you can use it in the shower if you want, and it makes it easier to clean too because you can just rinse it under the sink. It also, of course, has an LED spotlight so you can see every hair you're trying to shave, and it has up to 75 minutes of runtime. So if you're in need of a new shaver to maintain your stubble or to have a fresh and smooth face every single day, check out the Chairman Pro at Manscaped. And of course, check out everything else they have to offer too, whether it's body trimmers, lotion, shave gels, nose hair trimmers. I mean, you name it, they have it when it comes to grooming. You can see it all at manscaped.com, and if you use promo code BOOTLEG, you'll also get a 20% off discount and free shipping on your order. Again, that is manscaped.com, promo code BOOTLEG. That will give you 20% off and free shipping on whatever you get. Thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring today's show, and with that, let's get back to it. That completeness is also a reason why, bringing up the next game here, Broncos-Bills. I think the Bills are silently kind of pissed that Cincy didn't make the playoffs, because the Broncos, to me, are a way more, annoying matchup for them. Like, this is not a cut and dry Buffalo's going to the divisional round. Like, Denver is by far a more complete team than Cincy. They're a more complete team than Miami. They're a more complete team than Indy was when Indy was still in the mix. Like, all these potential 7-seed type teams, Denver is the one that I am most worried about. And I am especially worried about it for the Bills, and that matchup. Like it is a very tenuous matchup for Buffalo. If I had to pick a winner, I still think the Bills pull it out because they have Josh Allen, and Josh Allen is incredible, and like that has to count for something. But if we're talking about just who is the team out of all the potential 7 seeds that match up the best with what Buffalo does, for me, it's Denver. And if I'm a Bills fan, I'm pretty worried about that.
Right off the top, I will say I think the Bills do win this one. But as you said, every year when we get this slate, the wild card slate gets set, you look down at and you can't pick chalk, because if you do, you're going to be wrong. There are always upsets. So you start looking immediately for like which game in here probably isn't going to go the way most people think it is. And to me, this is the scariest game of the week. Again, I think the Bills pull it out, but let me lay out some of the reasons I think that fear exists. Denver's playing loose right now. You never want to play a team that's playing loose and fast in the playoffs. And Peyton feels like he's ahead of the curve. He's playing with house money. He made the playoffs for the rookie quarterback. He doesn't really have anything to lose. This isn't a make or break season for him. He's already done it. So what they do from here on out, he can call anything he wants whenever he wants to. So they're going to go for broke. They have a pass rush that can hit Josh. They led the league in sacks, 63, and it wasn't particularly close. They had 9 more than the next closest team.
I did not realize it was that wide of a gap. Like, that is nuts.
Yeah, everybody's been talking about Zach Allen for the last month or so. Nobody talked about him for the first 2 months. The entire defensive line is built of killers, and they came up with a strategy that's really working for them. Now, on the other side, Josh has been almost unhittable this year. It's one of the craziest stats in the entire NFL this year. He's taken 14 sacks all year.
Wait, Josh Allen took 14 sacks?
Josh Allen has taken 14 sacks in 17 games.
Has he ever done that?
No.
I don't think so.
No, he has not. This is clearly his best season at managing the pocket. And the offensive line has obviously been a big part of that. The combination is ridiculous. 14 sacks in 17 games. So hitting Josh is one thing, getting him on the ground, almost a completely different thing. There's not a better team in the league set up to do it than Denver. That's scary because, again, he hasn't been hit all year. If you come out and hit him 3, 4, 5 times in the first half, that's going to set a tone, and it's going to put Buffalo on their back foot more than they have been. So that's a scary thing. They'll also have a run defense that's second best in rush yards per play allowed in the league at only 3.9. That's going to make the Bills pressing that easy button of James Cook runs not so easy. And Brady has, for all the passing heroics that Josh Allen has, the real core of what the Bills have been able to do, and the thing that's kind of given them their spine against tougher opponents is, we need some yards, we're going to James Cook. And James Cook's really developed. That run game has developed ever since Brady took over as the offensive coordinator midway through last season. And when they come up against not only a team that has a great pass rush, but also a smothering run defense, all their gains are going to be hard fought. This is not going to be a get it over and have it be easy and a big lead early on. I'm not saying the Bills need that, but if they're expecting that, or if their fans are expecting that because it's a quote unquote 7 seed, things could get a little bit tighter on the weekend than they think it's going to. If Nix and Sutton connect early for the Broncos offense, Buffalo could tighten up. The secondary is very good, but again, they haven't been gashed. McDermott's defense has been really good at limiting that. And if Nix, who can escape pressure in his own right, is very athletic, has thrown more passes on the run than anybody else in the league this year, if he and Sutton start vibing.
Fun stat on that, by the way.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Aaron from Cover One. If you're a Bills fan, you know Cover One. I was talking to Aaron about this. Bo Nix, if you're looking at number of throws outside the pocket that he's had this year, running to his left versus running to his right, that dude loves throwing when running to his right. He does not like throwing when running to his left. There's something about it mechanically that it's like 18-42 if we're talking about where he prefers to escape and the direction he prefers to escape. So I was telling Aaron, I was like, if you're going to get Bo on the ground, it's you rush past his eye line and you try to get him, you bait him, which young quarterbacks fall for this all the time. You bait him into trying to take that exit route through the B gap and running to his right, and then you just retrace and you get him running that way because he doesn't like running left. So you overload him to the left, you bait him into running right. That's how you get sacks on him. I will note, by the way, for Bills Mafia listening to this, you just heard EJ said Christian Benford can't handle Cortland Sutton.
Jesus
so attack
Christ.
him, everybody.
I did not say that. And I'm also on record on this very podcast saying Benford is one of the most unheralded players in the league this year. And he is. If that connection works out, the Broncos, we're talking about reasons for danger here. They can get more pass rush than almost anybody Buffalo has faced this year. They're very good against the run, so those easy runs with James Cook aren't there. And they can put together explosive pass plays, not at the highest rate, not at the most consistent level, but it's playoff football. It's one and done. Like I said at the top of the show, everything's tighter, time seems shorter, pressure's higher. The pressure is really on Buffalo here. They're the better team, but they have more pressure. Denver has zero pressure in this game, and that makes them a dangerous opponent.
I really tried to narrow it down to like the one thing that's going to determine this game, and I couldn't do it, so I apologize. Because like this is the one game where I'm like, I don't think it's going to go super chalky. Like even if the Bills win, like I think they're favored by 4.5. I'm still taking Denver to cover that. Because I don't feel great. Like as confident as I am in Baltimore blowing out Pittsburgh, I feel like the opposite of that for Buffalo blowing out Denver. Like it's going to be so scrappy and so grimy and so close. Like I again, Buffalo money line, Denver to cover all the way. There's a few different things I want to highlight. The first of which being one of the things that Joe Brady's done really, really well this year. And maybe this has contributed to Josh not getting hit, which I haven't looked at the correlation between this, but it kind of sounds right in my head, so I'm just going to say it. The Bills use 6 offensive linemen more than anybody else in the league by far. And that has been, to your point, the easy button with James Cook is they put 6 offensive linemen on the field and they run the ball with James Cook and they mash people. They've had 157 snaps with 6 offensive linemen on the field. That is more than double number 2 in the NFL. About 15% of their offense is run out of these jumbo packages. That is a lot, EJ. You know how many snaps Denver's faced in between the 20s? Because I know goal line packages are different. In between the 20s, you know how many snaps of 6 offensive linemen the Denver defense has faced this year? 6.
I was going to guess double that. I was going to guess like 15.
And by the way, 2 of those 6 were Justin Herbert kneel downs. So like
none.
we don't know what we're getting here. This is uncharted territory. So if Denver handles that really well, and I don't know what they're going to call because I don't have any data, I don't have any film study, I have no idea how they're going to handle that. If they handle it well, Buffalo's in trouble because that's a huge component to their offense. If Denver can't handle 6 offensive linemen, Buffalo's in business. Again, I still think it would be really, really close, but like that to me is both the unknown part of this equation and the most important part.
That makes it really interesting when you have 2 teams. It's very different than like Steelers Ravens, right? They know each other. They play each other twice a year. They played each other twice this year. You look back and you go, well, you got a rookie quarterback, so who knows? 2 teams haven't faced each other. Denver hasn't faced a large part of what Buffalo likes to do on offense. So yeah, you are, putting pins in the board and tying strings between them, but there's a couple you're just kind of throwing your hands up and going, well, this is why we play the games. On paper, it looks one way. There's some big holes on paper. We're going to fill those in on grass, and it's going to be fun.
Couple other notes here. If Denver wins this game, it's because their offensive line dominates the Bills' defensive line, which for the how many ever number of years in a row doesn't have an ass-kicking interior defensive line. There's been a couple good years of Daquan Jones, and then, of course, he got hurt right when they needed him for the playoff run. I think it was last year. It might have been the year before. But, like, Daquan was kind of all they had as far as, like, size, toughness, physicality on the inside. They could, like, play a shade and help them get away with running all these 2 high coverages that they love to run. Because this is a very quarters-heavy team, right? So they try to stop the run from quarters. Well, to do that, you need an ass-kicking shade. Daquan, since coming back from his injury that he suffered last year, I think it was in November of last year, he just hasn't been the same. And Ed Oliver's just never been that guy.
Nope.
So once again, for like the third or fourth year in a row, Buffalo doesn't have a good run-stopping interior defensive line in the playoffs when they need it the most. And they're going up against a Denver Broncos offensive line that has been taking everybody's souls the entire year. Like, that's why I'm worried about them. Like, Josh Allen is amazing. He's an MVP candidate. Like, Joe Brady's coached his ass off this year. They've made it work with, a collection of different receivers that they either drafted or traded for, or, there's so much to love about this Bills offense. If they're not on the field, who cares? Right? So I'm really worried that Sean Payton is going to look at Joe Brady from across the field and say, you get 8 possessions today. Deal with it. And he's just going to run and run and run and keep them off the field. And then it just becomes a game of who can get like the one stop to make you effectively +1 in possessions. I kind of trust Denver more than Buffalo for that defensively. So like, how could I be super confident that Buffalo's going to blow them out here? Like, I just don't think they're going to be on the field.
Blowout does not feel like a term that's going to apply to this game either way. I would be stunned if this game was a blowout either way. I'd be very stunned if Denver blew Buffalo off the field. I would be equally stunned if Buffalo just trounced Denver. We're talking about a 2+ touchdown lead. I would be pleased for all the fans in Buffalo, but I would be shocked.
All right, let's move over to the NFC. Packers, Eagles, rematch from week 1 when they played this in Brazil. It feels like time has flown since that game, but also, God, that was a long, long time ago if we're looking at where these two teams are as football teams. They are not remotely similar. Like, either of them are not remotely similar to what they were back then. The Eagles have really come into their own, and it took them about somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks to kind of become what I thought they could have been. You and I were really high on them in the offseason, and then kind of things started out shaky, and we're like, I don't know, like, this doesn't feel right. And then all of a sudden it felt like the coordinators, if we're talking about Kellen and we're talking about Vic, they kind of almost took ownership of the team. I don't want to say they like put Sirianni in the back burner, but it kind of felt like they put Sirianni in the back burner. Like, this is a very coordinator-led team. It's a player-led team, not a head coach-led team. And once Kellen really kind of put his stamp on this offense and kind of, put his identity into this offense, incorporating more outside zone, incorporating more under center and hard play action, all that kind of stuff. And once Vic got this defense playing the way that he wanted them to play, they've been the best team in football. Arguably, Detroit fans, don't kill me, arguably been the best team in football since like week 7. So I was very critical of them early on, and for good reason. But now, looking at where they are and looking at where the Packers are, I do feel like there's been a separation. Not by a lot, because the Packers are still really good too. But I do feel like the Eagles in September and the Eagles in November, December, now January, 2 very different teams. And I would not want to play Philly, like, especially in the first round. Like, that's a tough task.
No, and we have the Bears to thank for handing the Packers Philadelphia, which, nice offseason present from a team that didn't do super well this year. I want to talk about the Packers because we talk about the Eagles a lot on this show, and rightfully so. One of the best teams in the NFL. And I agree. One of the most powerful teams. If you're talking about who has a good role going into the playoffs, Eagles are right near the top of that list. Packers run defense is top 10 in almost every meaningful statistic this year, which is not something the Packers have been able to say much lately, which is great. I'm just going to say which is great and put a period on that. Problem is they're going to be facing the league's leading rusher in Saquon and a rushing offense that generated the second most explosive runs in the league. So, very good run stopping force versus one of the best, if not the best running game in the league. If the Packers win this one, their young wide receivers are going to have to step up in a huge way, huge in capital letters, minus Christian Watson because he went down with an injury, unfortunately. And again, that's great. Their young receivers have been awesome. It's versus Fangio's secondary that has been absolutely eating opposing passing attacks. Least yards per play versus the pass in the league, least passing yards per game allowed in the league, and second lowest EPA versus the pass in the league behind only Denver, who we just talked about. So they're good. They're real good. They're coordinated very, very well. LaFleur is a very smart coach. They're going up against basically the best pass defense in the league, certainly the best pass defense in the NFC. Huge test for the young Packers offense. I say young Packers offense because the Packers offense is literally the youngest in the league by age, which is remarkable in terms of how well they've done over the past 2 years, because they were the youngest last year as well. They need to score on a very good defense on the road. It's a tough task. Is it impossible? No. But if we're talking about which way you leaning in this one, I'm leaning with Philadelphia. Both coordinators are dialed in. They have a tremendous roster. They're at home, and they're playing very, very good football right now. They're not one of those teams, a little bit like the Steelers across the state, that sort of limped into the playoffs. They rolled into the playoffs. So can the Packers win this one? Yeah, they can. Do I think they're going to? If they do, they're going to have to play exceptional football and get some breaks, because the quality of their opponent, again, on balance, in the offensive side, in the defensive side, Philadelphia is a very complete team. Howie Roseman deserves a lot of credit for assembling that roster over the last 2 to 3 years, and they're going to be a very, very tough out.
I realized I lied, EJ.
Oh, again? I mean, what about this time?
Your first word was again? Really? Packers-Eagles was the one that was a 4.5 point spread. It was Eagles are favored by 4.5. Bills are favored by 8.5. So I really feel good about Denver covering on that one.
Yeah, that's I think that's a sleep well bet.
But I also feel pretty decent about the Packers covering 4.5, and here's why. I do think the Eagles are going to win. Again, I want to put that out there first. I think the Eagles are going to win.
Do that first.
The reason why the Packers will be a thorn in their side, and why I wouldn't be that shocked if they happen to upset them, even though I don't think they will, but I wouldn't be that shocked, because Green Bay is one of the very few teams in the league, and I mean few with a capital F. We're talking like 3 to 4 teams that can compete with them on the line of scrimmage, like offensive line and defensive line. Because Philly, if you're looking at their roster, okay, arguably the best offensive line in the league. They don't run block as well as Detroit, but they pass protect better than Detroit. So however you want to order those guys, and Tampa's obviously there as well. They're in the group, right? Defensive line absolutely kicks ass. They've been tremendous. Jalen Carter's an absolute superstar. You know, we talked about Milton Williams a couple weeks ago. This is just a really, really good defensive line with a bunch of dudes that can come at you in waves. Secondary, fast, aggressive, doesn't make mistakes. Saquon always one play away from 50 yards. A.J. Brown's A.J. Brown. Devonta is Devonta. Even Jalen Hurts, if you get him into 4th and short, congratulations, fresh set of downs. There's a lot stacked against the Packers here. But if we're looking at the line of scrimmage, particularly for Green Bay, this is a Packers offensive line that since week 10, which second half of the year, it's the more relevant half, they are 5th in pressure rate allowed, which is actually better than Philly. And their defensive line since week 10 is 6th in pressure rate generated. Philly, I think, was 3rd. But still, we're talking about in the ballpark for pressure rate generated, despite the only thing I ever hear from Packers fans about how they don't have any pass rushers. And I'm like, no, you don't have any superstar pass rushers. That's very different. You don't have your own Max Crosby or TJ Watt or Myles Garrett. But you have no fewer than 5 guys that have a pass rush win rate or a pressure rate or both that is between 15 and 19%, which is solid. You don't have the one guy that's sitting at 23, 24, like a Micah Parsons number, but you have a whole bunch of guys that are solid contributors and, dare I say, just darn good football players. Rashawn Gary has bounced back, especially over the last half of the year. Even Lucas Van Ness has contributed. Devontae Wyatt has emerged. Kenny Clark isn't what he was in his peak, but he's still really good. He's still Kenny Clark. Even Brenton Cox Jr. since week 10, they've gotten contributions from him. He actually has their highest pressure rate over the back half of the year. So, no, they don't have a superstar pass rusher, but they have a lot of good ones. And that's kind of turned this defensive line group into a unit that's better than the sum of its parts. And that can threaten Philly. That can absolutely threaten Philly. I think there's a trap that a lot of teams fall into against this Eagles offense where, they have one great pass rusher and a bunch of middling dudes, and then they get matched up against Lane and Mailata all day, and they disappear, and then nobody else does anything. You're not necessarily relying on your one edge rusher to win against Lane or Mailata here. You can get wins up and down that line. So if there is any team in this wild card round that I think could really, really push Philly, it's Green Bay. Again, I still think the Eagles are going to win, but if we're just talking about trench talent against trench talent, it's darn close, EJ.
And outside the trench talent, I want to highlight Edge Cooper, a guy that we talked to at the Shrine Bowl, who had I don't want to say quiet, but very up and down first half of the season. And again, you talk about the split of the season being in week 10. They've started to weaponize his talents, which are explosive negative plays on defense. Those are the ones he made in college. They got him on the highlight tape, and he has a skill set that allows them to, again, bring pressure, not necessarily from the defensive line, but to make holes with that defensive line and then run Edge Cooper through them at full speed, which he's really good at. Super explosive. And they've started to weaponize that, and that helps, again, round out a pass rush that is made by team, not made by a superstar.
All right, next game on the docket for the NFC, Commanders, Buccaneers. Is it weird that I'm looking forward to this one more than almost any other playoff game? I cannot wait for this game.
It's not weird at all. In fact, what I wrote is this is the most interesting game of the week for me because I think it's the one where we might learn the most. And as a full-fledged teaching and learning nerd, this is the one that I'm like, okay, how's this really going to play out? Two of the teams involved might be the most overlooked teams left in all of the field, AFC or NFC. Feels like Tampa Bay is going to be slugging away. Washington's going to be looking for explosives to keep pace. Why is that? Because Tampa can consistently run it in a way the Commanders have not been able to do since early in the season. Washington's averaged only 111 rushing yards per game over the past 4. They are a team that is fully in Jaden Daniels' hands right now. A lot of times with young passers, you'll see nope, we want to give them some planned up shot plays. We also want to give him a bunch of layups, and then we're going to take the ball out of his hands with our rushing game and our short passing game. That ended for Washington 6 weeks ago. This is a team where they're like, Jaden, take us where you can take us because we can't do it the other way. Tampa Bay's rushing in the last 4 games, conversely, 95, 110, 157, 236. Going the right way, peaking as they get into the playoffs. That's 149.5 yards average. It is, again, much like the Bills with James Cook, the spine of the game. They can lean on Bucky Irving to chew up those yards. Rashad White can come in the short passing game, which I think he's much more suited to, or really well suited to, quite frankly. I don't mean it to be backhanded praise. Tucker can come in and get some hard carries between the tackles. This is just the way that Tampa Bay can sort of wear you down and then turn Baker loose with his receiving core.
Is this a good time to mention, by the way, or rather to do my mea culpa
on
Irving? On
which one? There's 2 in that backfield.
I mean, both of them really, but especially Bucky.
Yes.
I don't think I've whiffed on any rookies this year as much as I whiffed on Bucky, and I know Raiders fans are going to be like, you whiffed on Brock Bowers. No, I still have Brock Bowers first round pick. I didn't actively dislike Brock Bowers.
Right.
I was real low on Bucky.
I know.
Really, really low. And everybody was like, I swear to you, he's the one sub 190 running back or sub 195 running back that's just untackleable. And I was like, I need to see it. And then I saw it, and then I saw it again and again. And again, and I think once we got to 1,500 yards, I was like, okay, I think I fucked that one up. So Bucky Irving, I'm sorry.
No, it's funny. I told you about Bucky. There's very few players that we look at who we are widely apart on. We might be a round or two apart, and I know that seems like widely apart, especially at the top of the draft, and it can be. But there are very few players where I'm like, I love this guy. And you're like, I flat out don't see it. I don't think he's going to be effective in the league. Bucky was one of those guys. And I felt that way watching him on tape. And then when I went to the pro day and I watched him in person, I watched how he interacted with his team, not in a game situation. Pro days are very, very different than game situations. I came away going, some general manager is going to pull the trigger. They're not going to do it up high. And they're going to do it because of who he is on the field and who he is with all of his teammates. He's the loud guy. He's the spark in a good way. He's the energy. He's the guy that's, just busting everybody's balls and at the same time going out and playing as absolutely as hard as he can. And somebody's going to love that combination. And to be fair, he has exceeded any expectation I had for him. I thought he was going to be good to very good. For me, as a rookie running back, that's 800 to 1,000 yards. That's good to very good. He has been so much better for that and really has spurred Tampa Bay on to their late season success as he really came into his own behind what is a very good offensive line. We just sang their praises a couple of weeks ago. Jaden's got to overcome some things, and I'm feeling like Tampa Bay's got the edge in this one. But man, if there was one player left in the playoffs where you're just like, Jaden's Jaden, he just does shit, Jaden Daniels is that guy. So I put it up there with an asterisk of like Tampa Bay, unless Jaden just goes off and does Jaden things, because he is truly uncontrollable if he does that by a defense. And he's proved over and over again in his rookie season in Washington, he is a difference maker, and difference makers show up and shine in the playoffs. So I think Tampa has a better shot of winning this one. They're certainly the more balanced team. They're certainly the team with the better rushing attack. But Jaden's Jaden, and he is an absolute comet.
It's one of those, age-old questions of, do you choose the better football team, or do you choose the team that has the most dynamic player on the field? And there's merits to both, and there's examples where both options end up being the winner. For me, I'm going with who's the better overall football team, because it's not like Baker's not dynamic. Like, Baker is dynamic. Mm-hmm. It's just Jaden is the most dynamic, right? Here's the reason why I'm going with Tampa. And I want to have a quick discussion about pace of play and volume versus efficiency. And this is something that we see with a lot of coaches that come from the college game, and I'm lumping Cliff in with them. Cliff as Jaden's OC, because Cliff cut his teeth in college, and I feel like this particular habit has followed him his entire way through the NFL. College coaches, especially offensive coaches, tend to focus on volume. NFL coaches tend to focus on efficiency. And I feel like it's a difference in mindset between college and the pros, where college coaches, they love having higher volumes of plays because it kind of lets them, we talked about with Roman earlier, poking and prodding and figuring out what works. And I need to call more plays so that I can eventually get into a groove and I can find things that work. And then by the fourth quarter, I'll be really dialed in because I just want data. I want to see how they react to what I'm doing. And I need more plays so I can see how they react to certain looks so I can come back to it in the second half. NFL coaches try to be problem solvers before the game. They try to build a game plan throughout the week where it's like, I want 60 plays to happen, not 80. And I want those 60 plays to be the best possible 60 plays we can call to get out of there with the win. I want shorter games because we play more games. I don't want to put 80 snaps on guys for a 17-week regular season versus 80 snaps on guys for a 12-week regular season. Like, we have to be mindful of that. There's more wear and tear. Like, NFL coaches just always focus on efficiency. And you see the difference in Tampa versus the Commanders with that volume versus efficiency mindset. The Commanders tend to have an extra possession per game by their own doing because they speed through play counts, or rather speed through play clock really quickly. Play counts, they're actually pretty much identical, which is what's interesting to me. Because the Commanders' defense has had some struggles getting off the field, so it's kind of limited some of their play counts artificially. But if you're looking at time of possession, the Commanders have the highest average play clock at the time the ball is snapped per play in the NFL at about 11.3 seconds. Tampa is the fourth lowest at 8.4. So if they're both at 65 plays a game, which they are, and you add up those 3 seconds of play clock per play, that's about a difference of 3 minutes of time of possession. If both of them have the exact same amount of plays per game. And 3 minutes is a lot. 3 minutes can be that extra possession that the Commanders are trying to get every single week, and that they typically do. Tampa's, I think, at 10.6 possessions per game. Commanders at 11.5. So again, it's about other way, 10.5 versus 11.6. That's what it was. So if we're looking at the Commanders having literally 10% more possessions on the same number of plays and less time of possession, that is where you see the volume versus efficiency. They are way less efficient in scoring, even though they have more possessions. Tampa is the second best offense in the NFL in terms of scoring drive efficiency at 52%. The Commanders are 15th at 42%. I know I'm throwing a bunch of numbers at people, but I'm just trying to illustrate the fact that the Commanders really, really try to operate at a fast pace, and they try to almost overwhelm you. And they're just not as good at it as Tampa, who prioritize efficiency and slowing the game down and kind of taking the air out of the ball. And I really don't think that's a good recipe for the Commanders specifically, or rather, I don't think that's a good matchup for the Commanders specifically, because if you're looking at how Tampa operates, and they're like, we're not going to give you that 11th possession that you always get. We're going to make you keep up with us score for score when we're both getting 10 or maybe even 9 possessions in this game. We're going to make you keep up with us score for score, knowing that you don't score per drive as often as we do. Like, that's the game right there. It's all about pace of play and efficiency. Washington's not efficient. And in the playoffs, you kind of have to be. So, can the Commanders still win? Obviously, yes. There's a lot of schematic nuances, and obviously Jaden's super dynamic. Like, he can will them to a win. But if we're looking at the macro of all macro data here, how often do you score and how often do you have the ball, both in terms of play counts, number of possessions, and time of possession? How good are you? Washington's not as good. And I really don't think that college mindset is going to suit them in this environment. It's a big reason why Cliff has struggled late in the season when he's been in the NFL in the past. I don't particularly like this. Again, I'm trying to be diplomatic about it. Tampa wins. How about that? Let me just be short with it. Tampa wins because of that.
I think they're lined up too. It's a fascinating discussion about college and pro pace of play. We saw Ryan Grubb be released from his offensive coordinator job with the Seahawks after 1 year. He will probably go back to college. Liam Cohen spent time in college at Kentucky, and then he spent time with the Rams. So he has time on both sides of that line, and he's made his choice very clearly about how he wants to call a game and how he wants his team to operate on offense. And we'll see which one matches up better on Sunday, because, again, it does feel like Tampa is more well-positioned overall for this win. But, man, Jaden's Jaden, and people have been betting against him, for years, not just his rookie year in the NFL. And he continues to prove them wrong, even at the highest level of football. And that is fascinating and has been tremendously fun to watch as a football fan.
All right, last game of the week. Vikings, Rams. I am eerily fascinated by this one, right? Because I think, and I don't want to say that Sam Darnold got or found out or exposed or anything like that in that last game against Detroit, because I just don't I don't want to say a quarterback that's been as successful as him this year can just be suddenly exposed. But I will say this. Aaron Glenn came into that game with a very deliberate plan. Sam Darnold had 9 pass attempts the entire year against 0 leading up to that game in weeks 1 through 17. He had 14 in week 18. Aaron Glenn was like, I'm going to heat you up. Like, I am down pass rushers. I am down DBs. I'm going to heat you up. But it wasn't coming from a place of desperation of like, oh, I have to do this. It felt targeted. It felt purposeful. And if you're looking at the style in which they called those blitzes, it felt like a mirror image of a game plan that had worked against Darnold 5 years earlier. I want to take you back to the 2019 season, October. I think this was Darnold's second year in the league. The famous I'm seeing ghosts game against the Patriots. The last time Darnold saw 0 14 times in a game was that game. And the only time I can recall any quarterback seeing 0 that much in one game was Lamar against Miami. I think it was 2021.
Yep.
But we're talking about Sam Darnold twice in 5 years seeing a call that you never see that much in one game. Like to the point where going into the week, Detroit was 17th in 0 for the entire year. Now they're 6th from one game, right? So I felt like Aaron Glenn going into this one was like, I need to see what's worked against him in the past. Let me go through everything. And like this dude was crawling through the dungeon, right? Trying to figure out what has really damaged Sam in the past. And I think he pulled up that 2019 game and he studied it and was like, fuck it. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down swinging. Right? Like, I'm going to do this because nothing else has worked this year against him. I'm going to try it. And if it fails, it fails. Fine. But I'm going to try it. And then I think it became clear by the end of the first quarter of like, oh, this is working. Like, oh, we got something here. And then he just kept calling it and he kept calling it and he kept calling it. And Sam just kept missing touchdowns. He was inaccurate. He made bad reads. Like it flustered him. Like it straight up flustered him. And I think by, the third, fourth quarter, Aaron Glenn, like anytime he was in a jam, he called 0 and it worked almost every single time. If you're looking at the difference in stats, in that 2019 game, he was 5 of 12 with 2 picks and 2 sacks. In this game, he was 6 of 14 for 63 yards and 4.5 yards per attempt. So at least he didn't throw picks, but like he wasn't good. So my focus of this game is, will the Rams look at that? Will they look at how much 0 Aaron Glenn called last week? And will they look at that 2019 game and see a pattern and do something that they have not done all year, which is call 0? They don't really blitz that much. They have a great front four. They rush with that front four. That's what they did earlier this year when these two teams played the first time. Will they look at that game plan and say, we think we can do that too? I am fascinated to see what direction they go because it's on tape and it's on paper. There's evidence that it works. Do they have the guts to do it?
Fun fact for fans at home, we don't share our notes before we do these, and I have reference to both ghosts and why Darnold is a pumpkin.
Oh, did you have the same thing?
We'll do this. It happens more than you might think, but we will do this in reverse. I will talk about Sam and why he turned into a pumpkin. Then we'll kind of go back to the front and set the stage for Rams Vikings as opposed to what happened in the Lions game. What happened in the Lions game is Darnold became the main liability of the Vikings for the first time all year. Again, he has had a very good year, but Detroit managed to make him look like a pumpkin. So I'm going to give you season stats versus the Detroit game alone. Completion percentage, 23% lower. 66 dropped to 43. Yards, 88 below his season average, dropped from 254 to 166. Average net yard per attempt dropped a full 5 yards, 8.2 to 3.3. And his rating dropped 47 points, 102 to 55. So it's cruel. And it came at the worst possible time because we talked about it in our preview. It was a rare Week 18 game. two teams, some of the best teams in the league, certainly best teams in their conference, facing off at full strength with something still to play for in the last week of the season. So this isn't one of the Week 18 games that I referenced earlier in the podcast that's weird for contenders. This was two contenders going head-to-head with everything they had left. So it is more indicative of, performance than a typical Week 18 game would be, where people are resting their starters. If the Vikings have a chance, Darnold cannot see the ghosts of last week. There's the ghost reference. He has to come out aggressive and sharp. And that's a huge challenge mentally, because he has been so good over the entire year. And then to stumble on the doorstep, and it really does set them into this game. This is a weird game. Again, the Vikings are the visitors in this scenario, which is nuts because they're the 14-win team. They lose the tilt with Detroit for NFC supremacy and end up having to go on the road, basically all the way across the country, as a 14-win team to be the visitor, it's just a weird setup. And again, having been on this tremendous roll, being a 14-win squad, and then having a tough loss, not a bad loss, but a tough loss to Detroit. Now you got to travel, got to go on the road. You got to meet your former mentor who knows all your ins and outs and has his team playing as well as anybody in the league right now, for talking about just right now. Again, I don't think he has the roster necessarily, McVay doesn't, that the Vikings do. But if you're talking about even matchups, the Vikings opened up as road favorites at 1.5, which means odds makers are basically like, we don't know who's going to win this game.
They have no clue. Yeah.
Which is crazy considering how good the Vikings have been for the vast majority of the season. It's just a weird game, and I would not be at all surprised if McVay wins it, because he is a very good big game head coach.
And if the Vikings do win this game, and then the other games go chalk, if the Bucs beat the Commanders and if the Eagles beat the Packers, guess what? You're going right back to Detroit, bud. So like they are on the hardest possible road, right? Because then you got Eagles Bucs in the divisional round. If the Eagles win that one, then you got to go to Philly. So it's like you might have to go from the Rams, who ended the year on. I mean, I'm not going to really count Week 18 because Week 18 is odd. But before that, they were on a 9-2 run. So you got to go on the road to a team that was on a 9-2 run after starting 1-4 when they were all banged up, and then you got to go to Detroit and do that whole song and dance again, and then you got to go to maybe the best team in the league, and then by the way, Lamar or Patrick or Josh will be waiting for you in the Super Bowl. Have fun.
That is the all Madden difficulty for the NFL playoffs.
It's ridiculous, man. It's like when Oregon, it's like, oh, okay, you got a bye week. Have fun with Ohio State. It's like, come on, man. You couldn't give us Boise? Really?
Right. Where's Cuttstown? Give me Cuttstown.
Yeah. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed this preview of Wildcard Weekend, wherever you happen to be watching or listening. Want to thank all of our executive producers on the Bootleg Football Patreon for helping to make this show possible. Fitzy, Connor, Eichen, Liam, and Mike. Once again, appreciate all you boys for making our dreams come true and doing this for a living. I want to thank Homage, our clothing partner. I'm wearing a Texan shirt from Homage right now. EJ is wearing a SNL More Cowbell shirt. If you want to get something to support your favorite team, or if you're a Bears fan and you want to get something that isn't Bears related, because you can't bring yourself to do it anymore, they have a whole bunch of non-Bears related gear. They have college football, they have SNL, they have national parks, they have bootleg gear. If you want to get a bootleg, merch, anything you get at the link in the description below or at the QR code on the screen, doesn't even matter what it is, we will get a cut of it if you use our link. So thank you once again for that. Thank you to Underdog. Thank you to Manscaped. I think that's all I got. EJ, any final words?
No, that's a lot. It's plenty. Almost an hour and a half. Hope you all enjoyed it. I know you love the longer ones, and we'll be doing it all the way through the Super Bowl.
Also, we will talk about the coaches getting hired and fired, but we don't know who's getting hired yet, so we'll save that for later. All right. See you guys next week.